It's been a while since I have posted a long form video. There's been a lot going on. As many of you probably know, I run a business called The Big Favorite, and that takes up a lot of my time. But I am carving out more of my time to do this because you guys asked for it. And also, I just love talking about this stuff, and I feel very compelled ever since I had a spiritual awakening in 2023. A couple of updates. I'll be putting half or more of the episode into YouTube. I'll do shorts on TikTok, and then the full episodes will go onto my new Patreon called Post Normal. This is something that I've been working on, and I'm so excited about it. It's just a place where I'm putting all my thoughts. I'll put behind the scenes stuff. I will put full episodes of Post Normal. And even if you upgrade to the paid tier, you get access to the book club. And I'm so excited about the book club because I need people to talk about this stuff with. So it's about building a community around this topic and trying to build something that's meaningful and that's helpful for people, that's not just focused on the nuts and bolts conversation of UFOs, but the more spiritual side of it as well. So if you're here, you're early, and that's the point. Now here's the episode. Age of Disclosure, is it worth the $19.99 on Amazon Prime? Okay, my hot take is that for people who are inside the conversation already, there's not a lot of new information here. I would wait until the price comes down, okay? And I'm going to tell you all about it anyway. But for people outside of the conversation, it's probably an important documentary that will keep momentum going in the government, keep public pressure on our representatives in Congress, and keep things moving forward, mainly because of the credibility of the people that they interviewed. I have some thoughts on all of that, which I'll get into, but I think it can be seen from two perspectives. It really feels like this is controlled disclosure, like from within the DoD. And if I were parts of the government, like we know that there are parts of the government that like don't want this to come out. Like these are not elected officials. These are legacy officials who have been there probably like for decades, who are either trying to stop it or they are trying to push out information, but they're trying to do it in a controlled manner. Because the long and short of it is, like, I think, this is my speculation only, that the UFO phenomenon is connected to our ascension, our evolution as humans. And that involves things like psionics or psychic abilities, telepathy, telekinesis, bilocation, as Diana Pasulka would say. These things have the potential to really disrupt the world, especially if you read some of Jason Giorgiani's work. He talks about this spectral revolution, and that quite possibly Descartes, the Cartesian revolution could have been part of an effort to stop our evolution, because it's a little scary when you think, well, what if people can read your thoughts? What if they can get your credit card information? But again, like, there's a big piece of intention behind that. So we'll get there, and I'll get there in future videos. That's about the body as technology, and the gifts that you're able to get through your intention is very important. So anyway, that's a whole other thing. But what I'm really getting at is that there are parts of the DoD who want this to come out, but want it to be controlled. And if it were me and I was in their shoes and I wanted to make sure that like people were aware of this, but that they didn't pursue it in their own way, I would frame it around national security. I would make them feel scared. I would make them feel like this is something that is out of their depth and that they shouldn't pursue it because it's scary. And that is exactly what we saw here today, okay? The amount of times that I heard threat, concern, risk, there's my dog, risk, concern. They even talked about how the FAA wasn't tracking these, and this is like a concern for American citizens. And for me, I'm like, it's never hit a plane before. Like, why are we so concerned? Like, Lou Elizondo is a known figure who likes to strike fear. And for me, that is kind of a, I don't know, you got to consider the source, right? Okay, and I don't want to be naive here because perhaps there are good aliens and bad aliens. I mean, if you watch Area 52 with Chris Ramsey, he interviewed Dr. Diana Hennessy Powell, and he did ask her, he said, what do the non speaking autistic kids say about aliens? And she said, there are good ones and there are bad ones. So, of course, we don't want to be naive here at all. But if there is more information that we need to know, then just, you should be afraid of all of it, because that leans towards defense, that leans towards war. If you understand the nature of our reality, it's a reflection of us. And so I want to be careful about pursuing this through any sort of defense lens. And that's where it really gets into the interviewees, the people who they feature, largely white, largely male, largely, actually, all male, maybe except for David Fravor, co-pilot, was a woman, but like everyone else is a white man. And not there's anything wrong with that, but you have to consider, you have to understand they all have defense backgrounds. They're all looking at this in a threat assessment way. And whenever you're looking at something as a threat assessment, you're seeing it as a threat. In fact, to these people, even uncertainty, even like I don't know, is a threat to them, because if it's something you can't colonize or dominate or kill, it's a predator, So we have to really consider like who these people are and what they're speaking about, and that they probably do have an agenda from the DoD. Because I want to just remind you that this phenomenon has actually been incredibly positive for some experiencers. And in fact, a lot of experiencers have had really, really amazing experiences, including myself. Okay, so we have Chris Bledsoe, who had, he was abducted. He was given information about a new age, a new knowledge, and 1,000 years of peace. He was given miraculous healings of some of the things that he was dealing with. We have the Ariel school children who said that the beings that looked very much like tall grays with big eyes told them that they needed to steward the environment with care, that they needed to avoid technology, that they needed to make sure they were taking care of their environment. That has stuck with all of those kids over these years. My own personal experience has been incredibly positive and beautiful. So they leave that out, and you just have to ask why. So with all of that kind of out of the way, there are some new things that we learn about. In fact, Jay Stratton said he's seen non-human craft and non-human bodies. It sounded like with his own two eyes. Maybe it was through pictures or video, but he has seen that, which is, we don't hear that typically. We heard a lot of really great and impactful testimony from Hal Puthoff, who, as if you're in this conversation, he's like very deeply embedded in like the beginnings from the 1960s on, and specifically around astrophysics, quantum physics, telepathy, psionics. Like he was a part of all of this stuff, and reverse engineering, and sort of being inside of the think tank of these SAPs. They talked about how the Bush administration wanted to go public with this, and they sort of assessed this from a risk perspective. And I think we had known about this from the Harold Malmgren episode, where Malmgren tells Jesse that the Bush administration was considering some disclosure, but then they read Three Body Problem and decided against it. We heard Eric Davis say that he knows about 2 different species of non-human intelligence, which is really interesting because we don't hear that typically. A lot of times we only hear about the grays, so I need more information there. Like, who are these 2 new species? And then we heard Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff talk about the physics of the hypotheses behind these propulsion systems. they speculated that it could either be like entangled with an energy source that is like not nearby, that's powering the craft, or how we've seen him talk about this in niche communities and conversations before about the gravity well and the gravity wave. This kind of takes me back to Bob Lazar's testimony about gravity A, gravity B, and how the craft manipulate gravity and create these sort of like warp hyper bubbles around the craft that they let them travel without effect from our space and time. So like they can evade our laws of gravity, but just by creating this sort of energy bubble around the craft. So those were interesting things. I think my takeaway there is that like they have to have known that either the Chinese and the Russians already know that, or it's pieces of disinformation that they are trying to mislead people with, or it's a recruiting tactic to put out like little pieces of information where it can get people interested that are in the general public, that maybe have ideas about how to create or utilize this kind of technology. So we saw sort of an organizational chart of how these special access programs were controlled. So clearly there's the CIA is at the top, or some members of the CIA are at the top. Then you have the defense contractors, who these technologies and crash retrievals were probably moved there because they can't be FOIA'd, right? Like that's the private sector. And then you also have the DOE, which we have heard a lot about in Jesse Michaels' reporting on how they might be involved. And then the U.S. Air Force is also involved. I mean, they are the ones sort of like monitoring the skies and flying in the skies and having most of the experiences one-on-one with some of these craft. We have heard all of these things, but they really sort of put it together, and I think that's pretty impactful for people who are trying to pursue, especially people in Congress who are trying to pursue this topic. The other thing about these energy sources, I'll sort of go back to Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff. Hal had said, like, a new energy source is a humanitarian issue. I'm really interested in this conversation because of the implications that this would have on climate change, climate impact. Look, whatever you believe about climate change, you can see that just from around you that we are having an environmental impact no matter what we're doing, and it's sort of screaming out for help. And so when I hear things about 0 point energy and the ability to create forms of energy that would not have such a bad impact on the planet, I'm like all in. So that is really interesting to hear, somebody like Hal Puthoff say, like, this is a humanitarian issue and it's something that we need to pursue. That said, he also talks about how the phenomenon is, like, what is it? And he relates it to an anthill. He says, well, an anthill in the back of your yard is not a problem, but when it starts to come into your house, that could change. And I'm like, okay, well, like, what do you know that we don't know? Because a lot of us are having positive experiences with it, and all we see is like the government pursuing these things and like shooting them with Hellfire missiles. And like, is that really the way that we want to present ourselves to, an interstellar species? Like, I don't think so. So I just find these analogies interesting, and like, to what end? Because again, like, I'll say it again, we have to ask questions when the lean is towards defense, when the lean is towards scary, when the lean is towards war, when we all know, at least the people inside of this conversation know, that like sometimes, or not sometimes, like a lot of the time, the phenomenon is a direct reflection of what's inside of you. So with these people and their backgrounds, and they're like leading the charge into the phenomenon, like, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable. I'm like, where are the women? Where's the balance? Where are the indigenous people who have known about the phenomenon forever? Where is the diversity? And I'm not talking about D&I. I'm just talking about, like, we do need some diverse perspectives in order to really understand what this is all about, because I don't think these people are representative of everybody on planet Earth. That's just me. So anyway, My assessment is, if you're in this conversation and you're here now, save the money, wait for it to become a little cheaper or even free before you watch it. Maybe go watch some breakdowns on it. I'm sure tons of people on YouTube are going to be talking about this. Um, and if you're new to the conversation and you think I'm a wacko and you need some people with more credibility or position or like fancy titles within the government to tell you that this is real, then yeah, I think you should pay the $20 and go watch it. So the last thing I'll say is they talked about the UAP Disclosure Act, how that's getting blocked, how that would protect whistleblowers. I think if we want more information and we want to pursue this, then we do need to protect whistleblowers, because even the last congressional hearing on this was pretty impactful, especially even for me, it was impactful. I think, George Knapp came to play, and Dylan Borland had a really interesting testimony. We heard things that we've just never heard before. Also, Nucitelli and this like giant red square. Like, these things are very interesting, and I'm sure there is more knowledge about what these things are, who pilots them, where do they come from, what is their motive. Like, I think there's more here, so we do need to push for the UAP Disclosure Act to protect these whistleblowers. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for joining me on Post Normal, and I have some really exciting things coming up next time. I have like a lot of stuff in the pipeline that I want to talk about. So please hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.